That was pretty singing tonight. Thank you all. It's good to see y'all. Y'all look incredibly alike. It's unreal. I just seeing y'all sit next to each other. I'm thinking, wow. All right. Well, I'm glad y'all are here. Really am glad every one of you are here tonight. My family is home. They are not sick, but tired. Sometimes you can be sick and tired. They are just tired. And so mostly just the kids are beyond being here this evening. And so anyways, just had to make a decision for them for tonight. So anyways, they miss you, and they'll be back Sunday. Daniel chapter 9 is where we're going to be at this evening. Last week, we did not finish Daniel chapter 9. In fact, we went through the entire chapter, and we skipped out on just 2 verses for the most part. We're going to go back to slightly to cover something. There are going to be a few things as we go through here that will be review, I guess you can say, from where we've been going. We have to remember that the perspective in which Daniel is delivering this. Daniel got this in response to something he was doing. Does anybody remember why Daniel was given this prophecy? What was he doing in this chapter? He was praying. That's what he was seeking God. He was praying. In fact, the whole beginning of the chapter explains the timeline. They have been there in captivity. Just to go back, the Israelites have been carried away because of their sins. This time frame is supposed to last 70 years. Does anybody remember why it's supposed to be 70 years and what specifically it was for? Yes. Yeah, the Sabbath of their land. They had not given rest to their land. For 2 Chronicles chapter 36 describes that as far as the fact that they're being sent away for those 70 years to allow the land to rest those 70 years. And so those Sabbaths that they had missed, they were taken away for. Now, which is interesting, by the way, because they were pretty messed up. They did some bad things there. Like, they were sacrificing to idols, and they were like sacrificing their own kids to idols. And so, I mean, it's pretty bad as far as what had been taking place, and a lot of bad things had been taking place. And yet, it wasn't for those things. It was for the Sabbath's rest for the land that God removed them. But if you think about it, and I've thought about this in relation to what we had been studying in Sunday school, and for at least some of you, if you were in my class, we emphasize this, and that's that the reason why Moses was not allowed to enter into the promised land. So we're going back in history. If you're not familiar with the story, Moses led the people out of Egypt, and they were going to go into the promised land. But before going in, they had to wander around the wilderness for how many years? 40 long years. Now, when you know there's something good and it's right there and you don't get to enjoy it, that's terrible. But Moses himself was not allowed to go because he did something. Does anybody remember what it was? What did he do? Well, he did do that, but that's not the prohibition for going in.
He hit the rock.
He hit the rock. Yeah, he did it twice. And so God told Moses to speak to the rock. Now, before he had been instructed as far as striking the rock, on this occasion he said, speak to the rock. And instead he struck the rock. And then I'm sorry? He got mad, right? Well, yeah, he was quite frustrated with them. And by the way, naturally the Bible gives us the reason why. I mean, they were awful to him. And so he's like, fine. And so, but the other thing is, when he does so, what's interesting is that he takes credit for giving them the water. And that he gives them this water. He struck the rock. In other words, it demonstrates his heart behind it all. And so God tells him, because of this, you're not going in. So it's not just that he struck a rock, but it's because he took credit where God should have been getting glory. So he took it. Now, relate that to the Sabbath. The Bible explains that the Israelites were supposed to have given the land rest. There are certain ways in which they were not supposed to grow things. But the point is that God would always provide for them. But now you're going to have a year where you can't plant. You have time to save up for. And wouldn't it be great just to go ahead and plant one more year? I mean, what's a big deal? Just planting one more year where we should give the land a year rest. But hey, what's one more? In fact, wouldn't it be better? Aren't you wealthier when you have more money? Right? Or don't you have more food when you grow more of it? Well, yeah, it makes sense. So you're looking for provision, looking for God to provide for you in a big way. Then the big thing for us is, well, let's do this. So the Israelites, in prudence, they said, hey, we will have more if we plant more. And so they do it. And they're growing and they're succeeding and all this stuff, except for the problem is that suddenly who takes the credit for having whatever provided for them during those years that should be a Sabbath rest for the land? They do. They take credit for it. And God's miraculous provision of them is suddenly that they are able to say, well, God, we don't care what you say. We're going to provide for us the way we want to. God is saying, you're there under my conditions. And they're saying, no, we're going to do it ourselves. So God says, all right, you're going to be moved out of here. Time of rest. Now, there is more than that, by the way. That was transgression against the land itself, but there's obviously consequence because of the sin they've been involved in. Idolatry has been a very big part of it. There's been a lot of stuff going on, and they don't call out to God. And the point of the Sabbath rest for the land was not just that they were disobeying in that, but specifically they were not relying on God. That's the whole point of it, and that's why they were removed on that. And so God was no longer their God; He was an accessory. Can that translate to something today where, think of Christianity in America, our money, which has destroyed countless lives, and I mean people that live for that almighty dollar. In fact, there was a man I knew that I guess I still know, so I won't mention his name. It's unlikely to watch this. But anyways, I remember a pastor confronted him and said, hey, you know what your problem is? And he was an old mafia guy, all right? Like literally old mafia guy. He had financial problems one time. They dropped off a suitcase of money in his house. So he was an old mafia guy. And the pastor said to him, you know what your problem is that the dollar bill is your God. And he said, no, pastor, the $100 bill is my God. And so the point is that this is what I believe in. And then he said it quite boldly. And anyways, that's scary, but we're pointing out something. We don't need God. And yet we will put on our money that we're living for, hoping that money can provide, hoping that money will take care of our needs. And we even have the audacity to write the phrase, in God we trust on it. Boy, that's powerful. By the way, you don't think there's consequence with that, do you? For instance, the Bible talks about not taking the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And we oftentimes will say, well, I'm not saying His name vainly in conversation, but it's quite empty when we say, in God we trust, but not at all. Think about every transaction and every time we're living for that and trying to get anything we can past what we should be in regards to relying on God. And we say, in God we trust. The reality is we're not. And vainly we say that as we're making transaction for our own self-pleasure. And so anyways, with that, I want you to kind of think about that. Daniel finally realizes, hey, we've been wrong. He's the one that confesses before God, spends a lot of time in confession here in chapter number 9. Then it's delivered to him this prophecy, which we went over this last week, so we won't spend a lot of time. I know normally we've been going kind of till about 7, 8 o'clock on this. I probably shouldn't even tell you this, but it's probably going to be a little shorter today. And I say probably, which allows me to, probably means like 50-50 for me, okay? So, in intention, and that's what I intend. And so it's either going to finish around, 7:40 or 8:15, one of the two. It's going to be around that frame. All right, so anyways, with this, what we do have is that God explains to Daniel. Now, there was a question that Daniel had in this passage. Now, this is Wednesday night, so it's study. This is meat. This is a lot of stuff, okay? I encourage you to take notes. Mr. David over here got a really cool sermon notebook that they sell at Target, of all places. And it's actually called the Church Notebook, and it's got like a place for sermons. And I mean, it's literally just made for that. Pretty cool. But let me encourage you, take notes and stuff. If you don't know about something, feel free to ask questions, and we can go through this, come up with questions, especially after you follow up your notes. It'll be helpful to you. All right, so going on, again in this, we understand that the angel gives to Daniel, I'm just paraphrasing what's happened. The angel gives to Daniel a prophecy that there is a time period set aside of 70 weeks. Now, the 70 weeks is broken up into 3 time frames. Does anybody remember the 3 time frames? First time frame is a short one, which is the number, anybody? 7. I appreciate that. So 7 weeks. And then how many weeks? 62. All right. So that makes a total of 69 weeks, which means we have 1 week remaining. And up until this point, we have gone through the 69 weeks, but we've not made it to the 70th week, which is what we're going to address this evening. So with that, he does give the explanation of why this is going to take place. In other words, there's a bigger picture that God has in mind. Go to verse number 24. 70 weeks are determined. In other words, this is what is set aside. God has a plan, and He's saying, this is it. This is that time period. In other words, this is not by accident. Sometimes it feels like in the world we're not really sure what's going to happen. In fact, God is pointing out that there's a time frame, which means that there's not only a definite beginning, but there's also a definite what? An end. This is going to end at some point. So this is not just going to carry along until suddenly God gets control of things. God has never lost control. There's a time period that's there that He's sanctioned, that He's set apart. It is for a purpose. It has a beginning, it has an ending, and it's measured. Now, I enjoy good food. My mother-in-law is a good baker, and anyway, she makes a lot of stuff. She makes a certain cake that we really enjoy. It's got tons of chocolate, and you eat a cake slice about that thin, and it's thin, and you just feel it for a while. It just sits there. And but anyways, the point on that is that when she makes it, everything is specific. It has to have the right amount of flour and sugar and whatever else she puts on it. That's as far as I know. Okay, I don't bake. But the point is that she makes it just that way, and when it all comes together, then it's perfect, because all those pieces come together and it's right how it works. Now, God is saying it's determined, it's measured out, it's set aside. God has a plan, and that's the whole point of this. And we have to remember, I'm reading verse 24 to give us the context of how much is going to, what is for. 70 weeks, verse 24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. Look at the scope of who? Thy people. So this is Daniel and his people. He is a Jew. He's an Israelite of Judah, which is the southern tribes. And upon thy holy city. Now, specifically, he's relating it to the central point of Jerusalem. And now we have to remember this is written during a time of the city-state. Okay, so that's kind of how the world operated back then. Nowadays we think of countries, but back then you would primarily focus on the city, and then the control of the city would be quite vast. For instance, he is in Babylon, which up until a few chapters ago has been controlled by the nation, right, of Babylon. Now with that, even though it's a little city, well, a larger city of thousands of people, it controlled a rather large area. So that's why Rome later on would be a city, but it controlled much of the known world. And so anyways, he's focusing specifically on thy holy city, on Jerusalem. And continuing on, to give you the scope of what it's entailing, but then here's the purpose. To finish the transgression, in other words, what has taken place, you'll finish paying for it. To make an end of sins, which, by the way, that doesn't take place by them just getting back to the land and doing more sacrifices. That doesn't end sins. It ends the transgression, but it doesn't end sins. And so it's a very broad thing that's going to be covered there. And to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. In other words, this is all about Jesus. That's what it's about. And he's pointing out this is pointing to something great. Now, by the way, Daniel's not going to quite understand it all the way, because it's going to discourage him. In fact, in the next chapter we'll find out he was sick. This made him physically sick from what he's going to hear. But it's really, really challenging, because his question is, based on what I've been reading in the book of Jeremiah, we're supposed to be going home, aren't we? And it's a time frame, but we weren't right, so I'm going to get right, and so God help us. When is this going to happen? And the angel says, all right, well, it's a little more complicated than just going home now. It's going to take a long time, okay? And there's a lot more, and God has a bigger vision than just going home. And so anyways, he gives this explanation. We went through this verse in more detail. You're welcome to find us on Facebook and find last week's message on that. But in verse 24 explains purpose. And so then anyways, just for the sake of context, let's read verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah. So in other words, they're in Babylon, and there's going to be a command given for you guys to go home. Now, there's prophecies about this. For instance, Cyrus is prophesied in the book of Isaiah that says Cyrus, about 100 years from the writing of it, so 100 years later, that there would be a king Cyrus that would do away with Babylon, destroy them, and then send them home. But the prophecy specifically is saying that there's going to be one that's going to command to rebuild Jerusalem. Not just the temple, not just the street, but literally Jerusalem. When this command is given, then there's going to be a time frame. Unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So you have a 7-week period and then a 62-week period, which is, by the way, it's 69 weeks total. But you have to remember the term weeks in the Bible only means measurement of 7, or it's a measurement, like a dozen or a couple or other measurements. Okay, what's that? Or a few, yes, exactly. A couple, few, more, and a week. All right, so or a dozen. So anyways, this would be 7, right? And so these are groups of 7. So we're talking about 69 groupings of 7 years, which is 483 years. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. Now, by the way, we talked about last week whether or not this is like 470 years, 483, and we can have a debate. Nobody questioned me on that one. I thought we would have some pushback on that. My answer was, I'm not sure. So anyways, if you know, great. But we do seem to know that even in the book of Revelation, it's still operating on a 30-day month as opposed to 30 and 31 and 28 February, for February. Yes?
Not even King Herod knew because he was like about 5 years old and younger.
Right, 2 years. But yeah, exactly. It's very, very, they know it's around then. But so anyways, the timing was there. And they knew also that he was going to come later on, and obviously this is his introduction as Messiah. So not this isn't the prophecy of his birth, but a prophecy of his entry. And so we assume that this is based on pointing to when Jesus Christ would come in into Jerusalem. We would point that to Palm Sunday, Glory Sunday, because they finally recognized here's the Messiah. It didn't last long, as far as they recognized it. What this does do, based on Artaxerxes' commandment, it does give us a time frame of being in April, based on the month of Nisan and when it was decreed for this to take place. The number of years is what's challenging. The breakup between the 7 and the 62 weeks is somewhat complicated. We won't go into that. But the point is, back then they had calendar systems that eventually got destroyed in the temple in AD 70. We don't have those now, but it was very much substantiated when Christ was entering in. This was him, down to the date that God says this is a time frame for it to happen. Continuing on here a little bit more is going to be in the next verse, which I'm speaking a lot because I don't remember where we're at. Verse 25. Continuing on, as far as with this, you have unto the Messiah, the prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And so it describes how Jerusalem is going to be built. And it gives a lot of information as far as in the Bible how it came about. And it was troublesome. People were attacking them. People were against them. There was issues going on within the city of Jerusalem itself. There was a struggle where even getting from Babylon all the way back to Jerusalem. I mean, there's a lot of things. They even made several attempts to rebuild. They didn't end up following through on until it was finally done. And so anyways, there's a lot to be said there. So now we get to verse number 26, which is the text of where we're going to be at tonight. And it says, and what's the next word? After. All right, so here what we find is a gap. Now the gap is an important part because when we talk about what's taking place in Bible prophecy, I hear a lot of people saying this, well, there's no gaps. It will say that it's 7 weeks and then 62 weeks, and then hence the next week's got to follow immediately after. Now the problem with that is if there's no gap after Jesus Christ, or after the 69 weeks, then from there we would know 7 years from then would be the end. Small problem with that is that we're 2,000 years past that point, and still it's not finished. Transgression is still out there, sins are still out there, and basically we're still there. But here's the point: the Messiah, who does provide this, the fulfillment of this he does enter in at the end of 69 weeks. But then after the 69 weeks, notice it's after 69 weeks, but before the 70th week. Something happens. What happens after? Look at verse 26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. In other words, at the end of that time frame, shall the Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And before that, the idea here in regards to how he's killed, the term cut off is found multiple times in the scriptures. We mentioned that last week, referencing the fact that it's his death. He dies. He is going to be killed, and this is what he's addressing. So literally, it's prophesying that the Messiah would be killed. Which, by the way, would answer a lot of questions like what in the world is it talking about in Psalm 22, which addresses in a very prophetic manner this one that would die, and this one that would be beaten, and this one that would go through, in great detail, the death of an individual, the Messiah. Saying that's what happens. He dies. It's prophesied that this would take place. Obviously not the first prophecy that the Messiah would die, but regardless, it's a time frame that's prophesied now. And so Jesus Christ is going to come and he's going to die. And by the way, it's not for himself. In other words, he's not going to be brought up now, oh, okay, there's Messiah, and it's not because he led some kind of rebellion and they killed him, and no, there's the king. No, it's not for himself. It's for us. It didn't get advantage on his end to get a kingdom as far as on this earth and all those things there. But he still did it. He did it for me. He did it for you. And this is what he's pointing to, the great hope that they're looking for. But if that's the great hope, that the Messiah who's going to come and he's going to save, he's going to redeem, he's going to end all these things, he's going to die, before God's timeline is over of the 70 weeks, that's really discouraging. And this is what he's addressing. So this is one of the things that has to happen after the 69 weeks is over. After the 69 weeks is over, the Messiah is going to be cut off. Now, how much after the 69 weeks is over? Well, if it's Palm Sunday, then it's a few days, right? Depending on what you think, it's 4 or 5 days after, 3 or 4 days after his entry into Jerusalem. So there's at least a gap of several days for him to be cut off. If anything, there's also one more thing that has to happen. But not for himself, in the middle of verse 26. And the people of the prince, notice it does not say the prince himself, but it says the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and thereof shall be with a flood. And the end thereof shall be with the flood. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. And so here's another thing that's going to happen. Somewhere in this gap, after the end of 69 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off, and there's going to be great destruction that's going to take place, desolation that will occur there. It doesn't mean it's going to be permanent until the last week, but it does take place. And so there's another thing that has to happen before the 70th week, which is going to take place in verse number 27. Now, this is important to note that this is the people of the prince. Now, that word "the," last week I had mentioned that the word "the" helped me and understand this chapter a lot, because when it tells you the word "the," he's telling you this is specific. This is not just some random people of some nation. This is "the," which means it's the one that we should know about. And where should we know about it from? From the Bible, and specifically from the book of Daniel. And so what prince is going to come? Well, he told us about him back in chapter 7. He's described as the little horn. We understand that this is the little horn that is going to be the prince. He is going to be this one who's going to rule and reign. Not the prince Messiah, but the prince, what we would call the Antichrist, which, by the way, he's not called Antichrist very much in the Scriptures. That's just one of the names that we give him more frequently. It is a Bible name, but he's called many other things a lot more. And anyway, so this would be the prince, this would be the Antichrist, this would be the little horn. This would be the image of gold and the other things that made up the image back in earlier part of the book of Daniel, where you have Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, and the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire. This one image that is ultimately, finally identified in the New Testament as Babylon, in the Old Testament as this coming kingdom made of this beast. This is Rome that we're talking about. Now, with that, the Bible's very clear about that. There's going to be 3 kingdoms that are named, and we're just kind of going through a lot of facts. If your head's about to explode, watch it in like half speed next time, all right? This will help out. But I feel like I'm going slower. I just had coffee right before we got here, so I think everything. You guys are moving really slow in my mind. It wasn't Starbucks. It wasn't. I appreciate that. All right. But anyways, I got thrown off here. So my thoughts went beyond where I was talking. What's that? Yes, kingdoms. Thank you. 3 kingdoms are mentioned in the book of Daniel. 3 kingdoms. The first one is going to be Babylon. The second one is by name the Medo-Persian Empire, the Medes and the Persians. And then Grecia. So those 3 are mentioned, but there is one that is not named, which is described as this country of iron. It's described as a beast of unknown type, and so this dragon-type beast. But this is all referring to Rome that's going to take place, and it's going to be this nation that's everywhere. In fact, it doesn't die. It almost dies. It wounded like it's going to die, but it doesn't die. And so, by the way, and this is talking to the Roman Empire. And by the way, in case you're like, well, wait a second, I'm Roman, I'm Italian. Don't be offended by that, all right? Let's just be honest. If you're thinking, well, it's not fair, you're picking on the Italians. All the world's going to be involved in this, okay? So whatever lineage you are, your people will also be in that as well, if your people are still around, and that's a different conversation later. But the point is that it's one of those things that everybody's going to be involved in it. And so, in fact, my family, I can trace back the Answini line, which is on my mom's side. The Answinis go all the way back to we know specific places in Italy and where all they came from. So I sympathize, okay? But as a whole, we're bad people. That's the point. And so, anyways, the Roman Empire is where this Antichrist is going to come from. And it goes by several names, obviously, between Babylon and Rome, depending on when it's referred to. But anyways, when we understand this part, the verse makes sense when it talks about the people of the prince are going to do something destructive. It doesn't say the prince. In other words, the Antichrist doesn't come in, which means Titus in AD 70 is not the Antichrist. Because, now he may be a Antichrist, but he's not the Antichrist, because the point is that the people of the prince are going to come, they're going to destroy it. Now also notice the time in which it's going to take place. In verse 26, it's after the 69 weeks is over, or technically the 62 weeks, plus the 7, which makes it 69. But after that time period, then the Messiah will be cut off, and the people of the prince will destroy Jerusalem. This Jerusalem, that by the time this is penned, has not been rebuilt yet. Which means a couple things is going to have to happen. The Messiah is going to enter in during a time period where it has been rebuilt, which is the first 7-week period there in back in verse number 25. Jerusalem's going to be rebuilt. The city, the wall, the temple, the street, which is the way we would say this, kind of like downtown. Okay, that would be the idea. That's where courthouse is and stuff like that. So the street's built, the structure of the city, the wall, all of it's going to be reconstructed. Then the Messiah will come, and then it will be all destroyed by the people of the prince, which means Rome is going to come and destroy it. So what happens? In AD 70. AD 70 is the destruction of that, which, by the way, the Bible talks about when the people that were getting ready to crucify Jesus, they were given an option. Pilate asked them, "Whether of the twain will ye that I release unto you?" They said, "Barabbas." Pilate saith unto them, "What shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ?" Your Messiah, in other words. They all say unto him, "Let him be crucified." And the governor said, Why? What evil hath he done? But they cried out the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it." So who's going to get the blame? Notice what they say. Then answered all the people and said, "His blood be on us and our children." By AD 70, they will make that payment. Now, and it's going to continue, obviously, and there's much to it. And I won't go into all the details, but what we do have is in AD 66 that the Jews in Jerusalem revolt against what's taking place with Titus. Titus has just been defeated in battle down and against the Ptolemies down, which is the southern kingdom of the ex-Greeks. I'm sorry, let me take that back. That's a different story. This is Titus. Titus has come in because of this insurrection that's taking place in AD 66. There are a lot of people there. It's assumed about 1.1 million people there in Jerusalem while they were there. And there's a lot of writing on this because about 100,000 people survive. And so there's a lot of verbal testimony of this. But what ends up taking place is with their control of Jerusalem, finally in AD 70, Titus comes in, which will eventually be emperor, and they surround the city. They finally surround all of Jerusalem. And it's quite fierce. They build up earth walls all around Jerusalem, so that way you can't get supplies into them to give them relief. All the city of Jerusalem surrounded. It's impossible to get in, and they eventually will go in and they will kill just about everybody. It's Josephus says that they killed about 1 million people there. So it's a lot of people that they end up killing. Beyond that, they had suffered. I've got notes and notes on things that would take place there, but they starved. They got starved out for the most part until they finally came in and just killed them. Even though that they were starving, they wouldn't give in. They would not give in at all. They would not relent, and so there's much there. Josephus says this about them, which, by the way, Josephus is not Bible, so this is an outside opinion. But he says it's based on first-hand testimony. Many of them fed on old hay, and there were some who collected stalks of corn and sold a small quantity of it. And then it goes into some details, which I won't share right now. It's brutal. But why should I describe the shame and indignity that famine brought upon men, making them eat such unnatural things? This is what he asks, and what he says is that he does so for the sake of recording things that were not much known about, and also to the fact that there's so many testimonies of this firsthand that he cannot deny this history. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, just to go to explain how bad it was, Deuteronomy 28 verse 56, which is a prophecy of what would happen with them if they did not serve the Lord. This is what's going to be fulfilled, okay? It says, "And toward her young one that cometh out from between her feet." Now we're talking about a mom who's got children that come out from between her feet. "And toward her children which she shall bear, for she shall eat them for want of all things secretly in the siege and straitness wherewith thine enemy shall distress thee in thy gates. All right, so that's a Bible explaining what's going to happen. And so this is how bad it got there in Jerusalem. And that's what took place, which I understand. My goal is not to sensationalize that, but this is how bad it was there. So what it's prophesying is it gets worse. Now, my point in telling you this is that it has been so bad, and it's not very encouraging, is it? Here you go. Here's prophecy. Here's the end. It's bad. It's discouraging. It's distressing. Would it make sense then that Daniel's going to come out of this and he's going to feel sick for a couple of years from it? Absolutely. It's incredibly discouraging. But it doesn't end. So we go down to verse number 27. And he shall, next verse is, and he shall, verse 27, confirm, once again, the covenant with the many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abomination, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So here's what he tells us. And finally, on the 70th week, is something else that's going to occur. The 70th week, it's going to get really, really, really bad until it's all done according to what God said. Now, it seems to end really bad, but he's pointing to the consummation of all the things fulfilled back in verse number 24. This is why it's all done, but this is how bad it's going to get until then. The 70th week will be very, very, very bad. It's going to start off, the 70th week will start off with a confirmation of the covenants. Now, a couple things about this. I've heard most of my life within Christianity and study of prophecy that the Antichrist, the first thing he will do is start a peace treaty with Israel. Is that true? Well, kind of. I mean, we could say it that way. The idea here is that this is the covenant he's been speaking of throughout the entire chapter, which is the Mosaic covenant. We find this back in Exodus chapter 19, basically saying, you do this and I'll bless you. This is the promise. But Exodus 19 verse 5 says, now therefore if ye will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This is the promise. This is special. This is wonderful. I'll protect you. I'll provide for you. I'll make sure you have plenty of food. You'll live in abundance. God will bless you. You just have to obey my covenants. Now, the covenant specifically is in regards to the law. This covenant didn't make them God's people, by the way. How do we know that? Because there's a covenant that preceded that one. Does anybody know which covenant that is? The Abrahamic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant is what gave them this promise in regards to what they would be. Back in Genesis chapter 12 and 13, 15, 17, and 19, I'll reiterate it over and over again. Genesis 13, 15, for all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed, next two words are forever. But the way in which this is going to be carried out is going to be through the Mosaic covenants. This Mosaic covenant is, here's the law of God. You keep this, and I will fulfill these promises in this way for you to be able to enjoy it. This is a physical manner which is going to be promised, agreed upon. So finally, the Antichrist comes on the scene, the prince, the little horn, and he's going to come in and say, all right, the covenant, here it is. And he's going to allow. So here, and if we can explain it this way, the Antichrist will come in, and he will give the Jews what they want there in Jerusalem. The covenant will be fulfilled by the Antichrist. In other words, the way in which you will be taken care of and provided for, the way in which we're going to do this is by the Mosaic covenant, which the Antichrist will make sure gets done. So can we call it a treaty? Sure. Maybe. But the point is that it's instituting something, the Mosaic covenant. Now, there's a few problems with that. One, it's the Antichrist. This is the prince that's against the Messiah. This is the prince that is trying to replace him. And so that's obviously an enormous problem. The other thing is that the book of Jeremiah explains how this covenant would work. The first covenant, the Mosaic covenant, not the Abrahamic, but the Mosaic covenant demonstrated something. They're guilty and they deserve punishment. Naturally, they couldn't do it on their own. And so the book of Jeremiah, which Daniel has been referencing in chapter 9, saying, I'm trying to understand Jeremiah and I don't get it. Well, Jeremiah explains the further covenant that it's not going to be the Mosaic covenant that they'll be able to enjoy. It's not the Mosaic covenant they'll fulfill, but it's going to be what the Bible describes as a new covenant. And if I'm losing you, I hope that you'll try to stay with me. Just get what you can. But Jeremiah 31:31, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, which includes both what? Northern and southern kingdoms. not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in that day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which is the Mosaic covenant, the law of God, which my covenant they break, although I was a husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. In other words, there's a new covenant. And by the way, we just keep reading through that, and he's pointing out it's Jesus. Jesus is that. And so here's how it's fulfilled. When Jesus comes in, how does the Abrahamic covenant get fulfilled? It's by bringing Jesus. And so when Jesus comes about, then they have this new covenant, which is not by us trying to fulfill the law through the nation of Israel, but it's by faith in Jesus Christ. And so this is how it's done. So the Antichrist goes back and says, hey, we're going to go do this again, which means we're going to have some things that are going to restart. What's going to restart? Well, we're going to have a temple. Do you realize today the defense minister, not that it occurred today, it's happened actually a couple of years ago, the defense minister of Israel said this, that we are now in the age of the third temple. We're there. All the furniture's assembled. The priestly garments have been made. They are ready to start the temple sacrifices. They're missing something, though. They're missing the temple. That's a big spot, big problem. But the Antichrist will institute the covenant with them. And so he's going to do this. Now, when he provides this, what he explains in this is that when he does this, it's not going to go well, because they're doing this covenant and they're going to serve God and they're going to do these things that they've been hoping to do one day like this. And here's what he says is going to happen, right in the middle of verse 27. Or I guess, let me start at the beginning of verse 27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, so 7 years. And in the midst of the week, the book of Revelation calls it 42 months, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Which means what? There's going to be sacrifices and oblations. They can't have it until the temple is constructed. And so this is one thing that's going to occur. But it will halfway through. He's going to cause it to cease. Why? And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. In other words, so that an abomination can occur that will be so widespread, he will make it desolate. He is going to commit this abomination, which earlier had been called the abomination of desolations. So he's going to do this thing. More than likely, it's the erection of some kind of idol or an image of himself. The way Antiochus Epiphanes did it was he sacrificed a pig there and declared himself God. And so, anyways, this is something that's going to take place even until the consummation. In other words, it's going to get so bad as far as this abomination is going to be spread throughout the entire world until Jesus comes in and fulfills his purpose of taking over and winning. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. And so talking about the judgment that's going to take place upon them that are upon the desolate and this area there. And so anyways, there's going to be a lot of bad stuff. Well, once again, the new covenant says this. As I read that passage that he's going to establish a new covenant, here's further on in that passage in Jeremiah 31. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts. Jesus describes this as the kingdom in their hearts. And write in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. It's done. He takes care of it. He's the one that fulfills it fully, perfectly. It's taken care of by him. But this is where this is going to lead to. Now, here's the point. This is not a movie, all right? Now, it could be. In fact, there's a lot of people that made movies. There will never be a movie that's going to be adequately providing what this is like. But you have the bad guy that seems to be winning. There's a little bit of hope, and then everything falls apart. And at the very end, Christ comes in and he wins. The way it was described earlier in the book of Daniel was that this rock, not made of hands, is going to come and destroy that whole idol, this whole image of the kingdoms of this world. This is Jesus Christ. The point of it is, this is how bad, this is what a big adversary we're up against. And the only solution is Jesus Christ. He's the only one that can win. And so we look forward to this Messiah that has been cut off, who has been resurrected from the grave, ascended into the heavens, preparing a place for us to be with him, and that one day will come with 10,000 of his saints, and he's going to destroy all his enemies. And he will completely, unto the consummation, destroy. He will provide his wrath upon the earth and the people that are against him, ultimately ushering in his kingdom and his promises. And this is what we look forward to. And as we go through this, you can't help but to look at this and think, wow, this is all being laid out now. Now, a couple things about this. Back in 1914, 1919, something like that, the Balfour Declaration that started what we would call the Zionist movement was such that the Jews started migrating there towards the Middle East. By 1914, there was 90,000 Jews. By the late 1880s, 1890s, there was already 10,000 there. A lot of them died because of the swamps and the water, and they couldn't provide food there. There's a lot, but then 90,000 show up there in the teens. By the 1940s, you have the nation of Israel that's set up there. Now, people say, aha, this is the fulfillment. No, it's not. Because they still are not doing, there's not the covenant established there. They are not doing the sacrifices and the oblations. That's not it. It's really cool because they could and they're ready. But here's what it means. If the Antichrist were today, take care of whatever's going on in there and saying, all right, you can have this land. And my guess, and we'll talk more about this back in chapter number 11, that more than likely the Antichrist is going to take care of the whole problem between the Israelites and the Muslims out there. And it's not going to be by making them shake hands, by the way. Based on the fighting that takes place in chapter 11, they're not going to like what his solution is. But anyways, they're going to come in there and they're going to be able to construct the temple, and they can start it right now. They can start it immediately. And so, while it hasn't been fulfilled yet, you can see the groundwork starting to lay out there. It's getting ready for it. And boy, it's close. And so anyways, with that, the whole point is Jesus wins regardless of how great an adversary there is. Because it's quite an adversary. Enough where it would be terrifying, except for the fact that the one that's coming is bigger than all of that. And so where are we at on all of this stuff? Then should our thinking, our faith not be in the Messiah prince, not in the prince of this world, not in the prince and power of this air. It ought to be on Jesus Christ. To finish, let's go back to verse 24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. This is all just stuff that's going to happen. In Hebrew, it's interesting. When you look at the Bible, it does things differently than a lot of times the way we talk, in the sense that we typically like to end with the good thing at the end. Or the most important thing is what we build up to. Interesting thing is, you read through the Bible, one of the things that happens quite frequently is that the most important thing is mentioned first, because it sets the tone. And so if you miss verse 24 and what Jesus is going to do for all the sensational things that takes place in the next 3 verses, then we're missing the whole point. The whole point is that Jesus wins. This is the mighty power of God. And so let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll have our prayer time for our church as well. Lord, I thank you for the time you've given. Help us, Lord, in our study and understanding the Scriptures. Lord, I know that there's a lot more that we can study and look into, and I know that there's a lot of things that we truly just do not understand as of yet. But we're going to rely on you and ask that you would provide your answers through this, simply knowing the fact that you are coming again. Lord, we're convinced of that. We know you're coming again. And I thank you so much for the promises of the Bible, that they are sure, that we can believe every word. And I know what that means, Father, that today I need to obey you in every little thing. God, I pray that it would be a help to everyone as we understand your Scriptures, to have a confidence in what you're going to do. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right, let's